Welcome back to the shrine. Today a special component here is being fixed or mended. This is a rear swing arm for my 2015 Cannondale Trigger. I bought the bike used, and when I purchased it, I looked through, I tightened every bolt according to the spec. And then after some riding, I felt that the rear end was kind of squishy. It was going left and right, and stopped to investigate, but I couldn't find anything wrong with it. And then, behold, I found later on that the head of this bolt was popped off, and it's kind of in an obscure position. So here's the left side crank arm. This is the drive side, this is the left side, and unless you lean down and look under here, you're not gonna find it. So what I did is I took the bike apart and I went ahead and drilled out the threaded portion of the bolt, and then basically install the new bolt. But when this was disassembled, I realized that there is a bigger problem with it. So this is the chainstay. This is the drive side chainstay of the swing arm, and this is typically covered with some kind of rubber material or lizard skin or something to prevent the chain from damaging it. So this portion here is behind the gear, the chain ring, the front chain ring, and it is kind of obscure position. But as you can see, what happened, because this clamp bolt failed, this section here was able to torsion. So this side, this chainstay was able to torsion relative to this chainstay, and it's kind of hard to reproduce because it's a fairly strong part, but it led to a crack. And so at that point, I reached out to Cannondale. They couldn't furnish me the same frame. This was in 2019, and they offered a 2019 scalpel frame on which none of my components would fit. And I really like the Trigger. I like the Trigger because it's really two bikes in one. So I was reaching out to different companies who would be able to fix this, and it's either I didn't get a quote or the quote was too high and they weren't sure if they can fix it. So what I did is I went ahead and I repaired it myself, and as you can see, the repair was not successful because it cracked again. So what we're gonna do today is take this apart, sand it down, and then try to add more carbon into this area and basically try to repair it again, and fingers crossed. I'm not sure if it's gonna work, but this bike's been sitting there for 3 years, so that's my best bet, because I just don't have a company who would take on this and they would be able to repair it. I was also trying to find a replacement part, same as this one, and for 3 years I just couldn't find a part. So we're gonna go strip it down and put some more carbon on it. Follow me for this journey. Let's see if this can be repaired. The first task is to remove all the hardware from this area. Make sure that there is nothing that would interfere with the carbon process. So this fork features a spacer here. So there's a spacer you know, I'm just gonna take out the spacer before it can fall out on its own, and then I lose it. So you can see how the crack progressed here across the carbon. It's well visible. The next task, I'm gonna tape it off in this area. You can see the old paint and the new paint. So I'm just gonna tape it off here so that I know I'm working in this region. Just kind of make a clean boundary. Just like that. I'm gonna do the same for this bridge here, right where the old and the new paint meets. So the next thing is to sand this down. I basically just want to sand it down to the carbon. I just want to clear the paint. So I'm not going to use any kind of mechanized sanding tool because that can really damage the carbon. It's really thin. So here's some 180 paper, and I'm not putting it on a pad. I just want it to conform to the contour. So I don't want to sand it down to the bare carbon at one spot and leave a lot of paint on the other side. So I can feel it with my fingers. So right here you can see the carbon started to poke through. So what we want is the entire surface to have a uniform black color. Certainly you can do this with a power tool, but the problem is that you make a wrong move and it will just cut through multiple layers of carbon and it will be hard to deal with. So I'm just gonna go take my time. I think this is 120 paper, and just take off all the paint in this area, in this general area. Well, it took some doing, but essentially I sanded off the paint in this area here, and then you can see in the back it's also sanded off, and I also sanded off around this pillar here. This brace on the top flares out, so it flares out right here and right here, and it is because this is a hinge joint, so these two parts can move relative to each other. However, on the lower side we have the shaft or pivot. The pivot sits like that. We have two clamps here, so one is on this side, one is on this side, and it is clamping on the pivot. So what happens, essentially, this becomes a joint that is not able to twist to relative to each other, because this pivot will make it real stiff. So basically this little brace here is just up for the ride. So you might ask, why is it put here? Well, it's done to hold this socket here, which is retaining the shifter cable. That's all that is. So I could basically cut this off, you know, and cut this section off and just stiffen it up here, and it would still work. So the next step in the process is to figure out how big of a piece of carbon fiber I need to add. I got some carbon fiber here. This is some kind of ply. I've got no idea. Some thick carbon fiber. And what I did is I took a piece of canvas and I cut out the section and started draping it around. So that was the first try, and then here's the second try, and I think this will essentially work. So the idea is that I'm gonna drape it. I'm gonna drape the carbon around like this. Now this is gonna be like a real finicky endeavor when I'm doing this. So it goes around like that. And then this goes around like that. So then I can, you know, do one of these, or I can do two of these to stiffen it up, basically to pack a lot of carbon. Now if I take this off, the crack here reveals itself. So the crack goes from about this point down through here to about that point. I have two different style carbon here. So as you can see, this one has just these long strands, and then the perpendicular strands are some kind of white material. It's not carbon. So you would call this uniaxial. So this would take the load in this direction, so it would respond to tension load in this direction. This other one is a biaxial. So this one has carbon in this direction, and it's got in this direction. So these are two perpendicular directions, and the way it's woven, it looks like, you know, 45-degree angle here as it's overlapping. This is called peel ply. So this is gonna be the layer that covers the carbon, and you can see it's a thin material. This will soak up some of the resin, and then it will help to clean the carbon surface once the glue will set. So what I'm gonna do is cut the same size patch what I cut from the carbon. This is gonna be an extremely messy process, so I'm just covering the table with some foam. And every other section on the frame is covered here, so I covered it with plastic, so that, you know, this resin is most likely going to drip down, so I don't want to make a big mess. I prepared the patches here, so I got two small patches, and they're going to be laid right here on the outside. So they will go on first, and then I'm gonna put the large patch, then I'm gonna put the pill ply. Previously I put the whole thing in a vacuum bag, but honestly it was a real complicated and messy process, and I'm not sure it gave me the performance I was after. So this time I'm just gonna go and use electrical tape and then squeeze the resin out with the electrical tape. This process is extremely messy. I highly recommend a box of these latex gloves or whatever gloves you can get. Don't try to reuse the supplies, just use single-use supplies. So here's a stir stick. You can get 100 of these for a couple dollars. You know, single-use cup, and then a good scale. The epoxy resin and the hardener is from CJ Composite Technologies, and I've used this resin system before. It needs mixing 2-to-1 ratio. They describe volume ratio, but I'm gonna go with weight. So for this job, I'm gonna mix 40 grams of resin with 20 grams of hardener. So time is ticking from now on. 15:41, and this needs a true mixing. So typically mix it for about 2 minutes, and then make sure that you scrape off the resin from the walls and get a true mixing. Otherwise, you know, you might end up with soft and gel type, not hardened resin in certain areas. I like to keep a piece of aluminum foil on which the parts can be laid out. And despite there is 25 minutes to do the whole process, it's not a lot of time, especially if you're not doing it every day, and there are complicated geometries like what we have there. So what I've been doing is mixing, letting it sit, and then mixing again. You can get these cheap brushes. Again, these are single use, great to apply the gel coat. What I'm gonna do first is apply the resin liberally on both sides of the carbon. Now when you're applying it, the carbon will have a tendency to fall apart, but that's okay. You can go back and rearrange it lightly. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply the resin on the entire surface, and what I typically do is I'm coming in from the edges. So I'm not going from inside out, but I'm coming from outside in, like so. Don't worry about it, it will drip everywhere despite your best efforts. This resin is real runny at the beginning, and you will have hard time keeping it at one spot. So once the resin is applied, then we can go and do the first lay. This is extremely delicate process, and again it's like super messy. Here comes layer number 2. Again, I'm going to apply the resin on one side, then lay it, and then apply it on the other side. Just like so. So I think at this point what I'm gonna do is just lay this layer, and then I'm gonna put the pill ply on and just apply the tape, and then once it hardens I'm gonna come back and add more carbon to it, because this is multiple layers and I can feel that it's, you can see that it's kind of going, it is trying to fall apart. So there's the pill ply. So I have these pre-cut tapes, and we're just gonna go and apply the tape, kind of squeezing out the resin. And don't worry about it, you can come back later and put more tape on it. Again, this is extremely messy business. You know, these two layers, or these two pieces of tape, really just to hold it together. So now I'm going to start from the edge, and I'm going to keep the tape taut. And when you're doing this, you can see that the tape is changing color because we are stretching and straining it. So we are trying to keep the laminate a single piece, you know, squeeze out the resin and make sure that the carbon is going to bond with the carbon on the bottom. So all the tape does, essentially, it just improves the bonding experience between the base carbon and then the new layers we just put on. So just tie it off like so, and it should be ready for the next layer. Again, this is not vacuum bagging, this just, you know, doing it with the tape, and I think for this application it's perfect.